In 1983, what would become known as the classic lineup of the iconic and influential band The Clash definitively dissolved. It was the culmination of multiple years of strain. From pretty early on, they were wrapped up in a series of conflicts regarding creative control, probably most notably the song Remote Control being released as a single against their wishes. They would also spend the majority of their existence in debt. Their demands that the double album London Calling and triple album Sandinista be sold at the same price as a single, leading to CBS Records creating the caveat that they would not receive any royalties until after 200,000 records were sold, being a contributor to this. This was then topped off by the reception to the lineup's last release, Combat Rock. It did sell well, but its critical reception a little bit different. On the one hand, it was accused of being the band selling out, due to tracks like Should I Stay or Should I Go and Rock the Casbah. But on the other hand, the more experimental nature of the other tracks led to what could probably be given the good old Wikipedia slightly favourable reaction. All these stresses accumulating to the group's dissolution, starting with the drummer being pushed out in 1982, before guitarist Mick Jones was cast out the next year. In many cases, this would see the end of a band. Half of the personnel leaving in acrimonious circumstances, but what could tentatively be called The Clash now would go on to release one last album. Cut the Crap would be critically panned and just basically universally disliked. The remnants of The Clash would come to an end quickly after that, leaving Joe Strummer to mostly disown the record and bring a very disappointing end to one of the most acclaimed bands of their time. Releasing end 2011, beginning 2012, 13-2 came out under a very tight schedule. It released only 2 years after 13, and its development only begun after 13 had been released. So that's about a year, approximately, of development time. Adding on to that, development would be dedicated to addressing complaints that were directed towards the predecessor, specifically the linearity and lack of side content. And yes, despite what some people would like to think, there were a lot of people who complained about this. As a result, the project would be subjected to a Western development approach of milestones and monthly schedules, as well as seeing some of the work being outsourced. All of this work and planning done to develop a game which ended up being good. I liked 13-2. Let's talk about why. But before we do get onto that, I just quickly want to talk about some of the criticisms I received in the 13 video. Firstly, just a quick explanation with regards to what I'm looking for when I generally talk about these games, particularly RPGs. When discussing RPGs, I'm not overtly interested in the combat. I will talk about it and will appreciate an interesting take on it, but I grew up with the so-called golden age of Final Fantasies 4 to 9, in which the core combat wasn't vastly different in terms of the battle mechanics. Obviously there was jobs and things and abilities that was different. So I'm mostly concerned with characters, story and exploration, meaning that my takeaway from the combat will get up to the point of what will efficiently help through the plot. Therefore, I'm not going to care to read through tables and wikis to best determine how to optimize my build by 1.5%. Secondly, the linearity. As I discussed in my Wild Arms video, I don't have an issue with linearity. In fact, I'm quite a fan of the use of veiled linearity to subtly guide the player to their destination. And I despise the modern open world game which just plonks you in a vast space to twat about in. It's just using linearity generally requires the stories and characters to be engaging, and I did not find them to be so. I'm also fully understanding of the point that the linearity ties into the themes and the plot. but again, the plot wasn't very engaging. On the topic of the plot, I was accused of being stupid for calling the plot confusing. Let me clarify. The immediate plot is not confusing. It is literally just people try and run away from an unwanted fate before deciding to turn around and confront the things responsible. My issue is that in order to tell this, it is based off of lore, which you might want to have a better understanding of to really get involved. I'm not asking for a massive deep dive about every single aspect, but if I'm going to get immersed into a plot, I want a little bit more than a superficial covering. If you're going to throw around terms in casual dialogue, you better go about explaining it in the game. What exactly are the Falsi? Why do they do what they do? What is their motivation? Who is this creator they're speaking of? Why is the creator not around anymore? What caused the war all those years ago? If it ended, why are Pulse and Cocoon still fighting? You can't just gloss over these concepts you throw around, especially when some of them are actually quite important to the current goings on. But you know what? Maybe for some people that's fine. But this does require me to point something out. Different people are going to react differently to different means of exposition. I watched Mulholland Drive with someone recently, and they complained it didn't make any sense. But I was fine with it. Many people will say Metal Gear's plot is complicated and confusing. I don't think so. It doesn't make me a supreme genius that I understand these things, but others don't. Nor does it make them stupid. You get things, others don't. Whatever. I would also like to point out that if you needed a couple of playthroughs to understand the plot, that is not a good argument in your favor. This isn't Nier Automata or even Type 0, where information is deliberately kept from you until subsequent playthroughs. If you didn't get the story the first time, that is poor exposition. Next, the characters. This one got to me a bit because I feel like people were implying I'm some kind of callous arsehole. I completely get that they had just undergone a traumatic experience, and that was having a severe impact on their ability to make decisions. I understand that, and I sympathize. But guess what? You have to make a decision. This is a story which requires plot progression, and that requires people to take action. I don't expect them to be extremely logical and to be making brilliant decisions, but they do just have to have a little bit of agency every now and then. I once again point to Sellers and Terra in 6, who definitely were not making their decisions in the most logical and incisive ways. And if you're going to try and imply what they went through is not comparable to the characters of 13, then I'm sorry, all I can say is that you do not know the plot of Final Fantasy VI. And again, the issue is just that basically every character is guilty of this behavior. And when you need to move forward without deviation for 40 plus hours, it is going to wear thin. People don't want to listen to people feel sorry for themselves non-stop, and we want people to have agency. If you don't think so, try this out with real people and see how far you get. I do have to say though, I think I was a bit harsh on Hope. I mean, he was a child. It is a bit unfair to expect him to have the mental capabilities to process what he experienced. It is unfortunate that my general negativity towards the character's behavior had to pull him in as well. Lastly, I want to talk about the concept of defense. Another relatively common comment was, why call it a defense when you were so negative about everything? And I admit, the video did become more negative as it continued, as the game made me more negative as it continued. And I might have been more negative than my overall feelings regarding 13 actually are. But I do want to point out that a defense doesn't mean you saying, well, it's actually good and brilliant and everyone is being unnecessarily mean about the thing. Of course it can mean that. It can also mean, while this isn't great or anything, I can still justify why it should still be given attention and it is worth discussing. And I did do that. I stated that despite the multiple issues I had with 13, it was still an actual attempt by Square Enix to create a new path forward and was an actual work of passion guided by a yearning for creativity and an attempt to actually create a world and examine themes of the human condition. I look back at a time before Square Enix became dominated by greed, NFTs, and live services. I will finish off this little rant by pointing out that a lot of my criticisms were not unique to me. Many people complained about the issues that I listed, including critics and longtime fans of the series. You can call that an appeal to authority or the majority if you wish, but I was accused of conducting some kind of malicious plot to besmirch the name of Final Fantasy XIII, like I was angry at its success and wanted to destroy it, when this was like the most poorly received Final Fantasy, or at least among like the bottom 3. I will also extend an olive branch and say that as someone whose only personal experience of the response to 13 was that of disappointment from people who had been fans since at least the latest 7, I hadn't really considered people who only got into the series later, and maybe even had 13 as their first experience. I get that Final Fantasy games are a very personal experience, and so we don't really like it when people crap on them. But remember, this is literally my subjective opinion, and that should really have no impact on your enjoyment of a video game. But anyway, I like 13 too, so why don't we talk about that instead? I won't be talking about this for too long, since it's mostly the same, but there are some tweaks which I enjoy on the whole. A lot of it seems to be dedicated to creating a more streamlined and faster battle experience, which I can get behind. I could see an argument that it might be slightly less tactical than before, but it doesn't really bother me too much. Firstly, no more techniques, which also means no more technical points. This means that achieving high battle rankings now is only for the benefit of increasing the chance of better battle rewards. Included with this is the fact that you also now get gil from the battle instead of just hoping that items of high value will drop. This combines to improve an aspect from the previous that I didn't talk about because I didn't really care enough about it. Mostly because I found it too tedious to get heavily involved with. And that is weapon upgrading. You would use components that could be infused into weapons and accessories to level them up, and then combine those upgraded weapons to get better weapons. Now this was extremely tedious because of the means of obtaining these components. You can obviously battle for them and hope for drops, but for the earlier ones at least, you could buy them as well. But you didn't get money from battling alone, so you needed to battle to get components you're not going to use and then sell them to buy other components. And while 13.2 isn't too much better because there is still a lot of component farming, it's at least cut out the middleman of selling components, so you can fight, get gil, and possibly necessary components at the same time. As I've gotten older, I've really started disliking grinding more and more, but I can at least tolerate it if it is confirmed to always be progressing me towards something, even if it's by a minor amount. The other matter, which speeds up combat, relates to buffs and debuffs. It seems like buffs just don't last as long as they used to. Like Protect and Shell seem to just wear out quicker than I remember them doing in 13. But the debuffs seem to last the same length. Can someone maybe confirm this? I might be comparing it to late game 13 when my synergists had higher magic stats, so I just feel like it didn't last as long. What definitely wasn't a confusion from the predecessor is the new debuff of wounding, saboteurs and enemies have the ability to wound, which reduces the target's total health for the rest of the battle, which just pushes battles to go along quicker. Finally, to speed up battles further, is the tweaking of a feature from 13, which in order to try and fix, I feel like they overcorrected a bit too far the other way. Preemptive strikes. It is a feature I was fine with in 13. If you snuck up on an enemy, then you would get a preemptive strike, which would fill up the enemy's stagger bar quite substantially. Now, while it is a good feature, sometimes it would be a bit too hard to do. Some enemies would just smell you straight away and snap around, or more frequently, you would manage to become aware of you in the split seconds before you initiate combat. 13.2 tries to combat this by the introduction of a meter. The enemies are no longer present in the world off the bat. Instead, they warp in around you, and when they appear, a meter shows up. If you initiate combat when it's yellow, it's a standard fight. If it's red, you can't retry the battle at your own whim. A good punishment for not paying attention, even though I still just wish the game didn't have a retry feature at all. And finally, if it's green, you get a preemptive strike. And while the fix is good on paper, it does have a bit of a problem in implementation. It is way too easy to get a preemptive strike. It takes ages for the bar to go red, and combat won't initiate unless it does go red, or you make contact with the enemy. So you can just take your sweet time to run around the back and initiate a green meter. Which is a bit of a shame, because I do think it does help delineate more clearly if you're in a position for a preemptive strike, and I do like the new idea that you get haste if you get a preemptive strike. Another small thing, which I'm sure is just a skill issue, is that the enemies appear somewhere around you, and then you have to find them. And often this changes my direction, and then I end up disoriented after the battle and can't remember which way I was going. So that's the core combat changes. Let's have a chat about the two other most clear changes related to it. Sarah is the Beast Master. She has the ability to tame monsters that you fight. Every time you defeat an enemy, you have a chance to get its crystal, and then tame them. Once you have tamed them, you can assign them as the third party member for combat purposes. However, they do work slightly differently than just a third party member. They don't have the abilities to switch between different paradigms. Rather, they have one dedicated paradigm assigned to them. Due to this, you can have 3 different monsters with you at a time, and assign them how you wish to each of your paradigm setups. Each monster also has a feral link, which means that after you chain enough attacks, you can press square to unleash their special attack, which increases the chances of taming a creature should they be defeated by that special attack. The monsters also have their own Crystarium, and overall, I find this feature to be fine. It is a creative feature, particularly for the mainline Final Fantasy series, which adds a bit of diversity, and it gives the player the freedom to customize their party and fine-tune it a bit. But it does have particularly 2 things that make it a little bit less enjoyable for me. Firstly, there's just too many to catch, and particularly too early. Within like 2 hours of the feature being introduced, I already had 13 to 14 creatures, and since you can only have 3 in the party at a time, that's a lot just sitting on the sidelines. So it kind of becomes the Pokemon problem of not really getting time to actually play with all the different creatures and seeing what they're like. Basically, what I ended up doing was just assigning the late bloomer ability since they could be leveled up the furthest. And tying into this is the means by which they level up. They don't get Crystarium points like Sarah and Noel do. They instead need to be leveled up with monster components. And not only does this go into the component grinding I'm generally not a fan of, but it also decreases the chance of making use of more of the creatures. While I don't grind massively, I do explore everything that's available, and I never avoid battles. So if the monsters just leveled up from fighting, I would probably have leveled them up faster and would be able to swap them out more and use others more. So at times it kind of just feels a bit like a case of making up for the lack of a permanent party member. But it is a unique twist for the franchise and does have a fair bit of depth for those who would be looking for a kind of grinding collectible aspect. So let's get on to the other factor. I didn't talk about this in the 13 video because it was fine. I didn't think it was bad, but neither did I think it was brilliant. Just a perfectly decent leveling up system. Now with 13.2, it's also still just fine, but it features one change that I like, and another smaller one which I don't really like. We'll start with the small one, since it should go pretty quickly, and it's basically about how you navigate the Crystarium. While in both this installment and the previous one, the leveling up was basically linear, just pumping enough points until you get the next ability / stat improvement, 13 does it in a more aesthetically pleasing way. You can take a look at what is coming up and even read what the ability will be that is next. In contrast, 13.2 just moves along and doesn't really let you get that same view. Instead, just telling you about the abilities coming up in the corner of the screen. And it just doesn't give the same feeling that you are building up to something. Rather just press X to highlight the next thing. But it is really more of an aesthetic thing, I guess, since both are pretty linear leveling systems. On the positive side, when leveling up the Crystarium, instead of just getting another ability or upgrade, you actually get to choose what bonus you want, which just gives a bit more of a feeling of customization and that you are having some more say over your character's progression. But ultimately it was fine, and it is still fine. We are now done talking about the combat. And yep, it actually took a little bit longer than I thought, but to summarize, mostly the same as the previous, with some tweaks and changes that I like for the vast majority. But we aren't done talking about gameplay just yet, for 13.2 has stuff not only related to the combat. Specifically, it has yes, 13 has gameplay other than moving forward and fighting. Now, obviously you will be fighting while doing your exploring, but that is supplementary to the main goal you would be doing at the time, which would be toddling about looking for stuff. And not only does 13 as well have this option of exploration, it also has means to encourage you to do it. I shall get onto how shortly, but let us quickly discuss two new mechanics which tie into this aspect. Firstly, you now have the ability to jump whenever you like. And while I do appreciate the ability to play Final Fantasy Morrowind, it isn't the most useful of features. You can't just jump onto anything. In most cases, you can only jump over obstacles or specific gaps that would have been done automatically in 13. So it kind of feels sometimes like you may as well just have had the auto jump from the previous game. Though that being said, there are times where it can give you a better view, or you can actually use a bit of creative jumping to get a vantage point. And the final dungeon does actually have this mechanic as a requirement as well. So overall, it is fine. The other feature, which is a lot better, is Mog. Mog is a Time Lord. I don't think that's specifically his title, but it does make him sound cooler. They have the ability to travel through time and also unveil paradoxes within the world. and this is one of the big features for pushing the exploration. In addition to the chests, which can be found by just wandering around, there are also hidden chests that only Mog can identify. They have a kind of masked silhouette when they have not been found, and this actually does encourage you to keep an eye out. Pay attention to your surroundings, see if you can identify a shimmering out of place. It also encourages you to cover every part of the map, because while previously, well, clearly there was nothing there, now you need to get closer to be sure. The other thing that Mog is capable of is being abused.
Come on, Mog.
You can throw him around, and while it may just seem as the culmination of your frustration from the Moogle in Dissidia NT, it does actually have a use. Firstly, there are chests out of reach which you need to use him to get, and while most of them are pretty obvious, there are some that are pretty cleverly placed and will need you to keep aware of your surroundings. There are also certain hidden things that you can only get from Moogle throwing. Hidden, but not completely ludicrous. For example, this collection of flowers seems a bit out of place, or there's nothing at the end of this pier. Why not? The other thing you have is a map which fills as you explore it, and which does not give you the layout until you actually find the map for the area, which will then tell you the percentage that you have explored. And finally, once the plot related matters in an area are completed, you get access to a chocobo, which not only makes covering the area quicker, but gives access to other areas you couldn't reach prior. Now, those last two are more about ease of exploration rather than an outright incentive, I suppose. So let's look at two other incentives. One, which I will get to in a more long-winded way eventually, and the first one we will talk about right now. A feature which rewards you in gameplay and just as a person involving themselves with a work of fiction. Each area that you arrive in has fragments which can be found via exploration. Some of them can just be unearthed in the world, and others via quests. Yes, this one has quests, which you can get by talking to NPCs. Yes, this one has NPCs. Obtaining fragments results in three things. Firstly, you get Crystarium points for finding them, so it helps with character leveling. Secondly, if you collect enough fragments, you can unlock skills, which can improve exploration, like the anti-grav jump, which allows for better jumping, or help with some of the grinding aspects, such as the ability to speed up the game, or get shop discounts. But thirdly, you also get additional lore from the fragments. And for me, this is how it should be done. I'm not opposed to the provision of additional lore, but it should be an extra thing to be sought out, not needing a lot of reading for the purposes of the core plot. But regardless of whether you want to engage with the lore, there is still a material benefit to collecting fragments. So there's a deliberate design to push exploration from the rewards. But how does the world design aid in this matter as well? For the second consecutive video, I am going to need to change my usual order of doing things and run to the core plot and premise, because for the second consecutive time, the world design is heavily impacted by the plot, and not in the excuse for excessive linearity kind of way. Following the events of XIII, Lightning has become trapped within Valhalla, the central void of time in which time itself does not flow, but you are able to view all moments in time outside of it. She is currently stuck in combat with Adam Ant, and so sends Noel to find Sarah and get her help. Sarah is living in New Bodom, one of the many settlements formed following the defeat of the fallacy. She has been troubled by dreams she has been having, and by the fact that only she remembers seeing lightning free with everyone else at the end of 13, while everyone else is sure that she was inside Cocoon when it collapsed. Upon Noel's arrival, there is the sudden attack of monsters followed by sudden weird time paradoxes. With the goal of finding lightning, the duo travel through one of the time gates and travel to various different time periods, with the secondary objective of discovering what is causing the time paradoxes. That's enough plot for the necessary groundwork, so let's get going on. So, the plot revolves around travelling to different time periods, and the world design follows suit. Rather than a large interconnected world, the locations are broken up into what is essentially a series of levels, accessible from a hub world. I complained about 13 and its lack of connectivity, creating the feeling of being nothing more than a series of levels. But I feel that 13.2 avoids this in two ways. Firstly, you aren't railroaded into only one direction. While there is of course a main path, there are occasions where you can trigger different gates to open different pathways, and sometimes actually situations where you can choose the order in which you do some of the mainline stuff. The second factor is size. The levels are appropriately sized. They aren't so big and prolonged that they become a chore to travel through, but also they aren't so small that they feel constraining. They actually create a kind of episodic feel, in that Noel and Sarah will arrive at a location, attend to its problem, and then move on to the next one. It paces the game really well, making sure that no area overstays its welcome. But the most enjoyable and interesting part is the interconnectivity of these different worlds. Pretty much each world has one or two variants, either at a different point in time or in an alternate timeline. And this works very well. Firstly, for quests, you'll be given quests in one world, and some of them will be able to be completed in this world, but relatively more often you will need to visit another version of the world. And while at first, when you have access to few areas, it kind of does create a feeling of, well, I guess I just have to wait. Once you have more areas, it actually leads to thinking about where to go and where the thing might be based off of given information. It may also lead you going back to an area, at which point you may discover something new has happened. But it's not just a quest related thing that this design adds to. It's a general feeling of anticipation that it creates. There is a genuine kind of intrigue when passing through one of the gates and wondering what will be on the other side. There are various gates in the world, and the plot related ones need a specific artifact to open, but the others can be opened as long as you have a wild artifact. But there is no knowing where it will take you, so it adds some unpredictability to the next decision, particularly with the variations on the same area. When arriving in a new area, there is a good chance you won't be able to explore the entire map. Usually, there is some kind of obstruction or something that can't be reached. You need to go to an alternate version to reach that area. And again, you are interested to see how this new version deviates. There are of course situations where it does kind of feel like the same area with another coat of paint, but there is enough variety and the areas aren't overwhelmingly big, so it doesn't become boring in any way. But for me, the best part is that it's not only tied to the optional side content. The non-linearish exploration is built into the main plot as well. At first, I thought that the objective marker would strike again. Oh dear, where could it possibly be? but there are a few occasions where you are left to your own devices and need to figure things out for yourself, generally needing to look around for the gate that will open to the next world, all culminating in a final task to get to the final chapter, finding the graviton cores. There are 7 to find in total, but you only need 5, and all you are told is the world in which they are in, meaning you actually have to go find them and look around for them. And this is so refreshing, not just after the previous game, but just generally with the increasing refusal to believe players had the ability to do any kind of problem solving that began at this time. So we've got the touching up of what was already a good and proper combat system, and the introduction of a pretty well crafted and interweaving means of exploration. Let's quickly touch on the last smaller gameplay aspect. In order to further address the criticisms XIII received, Square Enix deliberately inserted a casino location to provide minigames, a kind of gold saucer light. And light is really the description. The available games are the slot machine and Chocobo Racers. That's it. Oh wait, but if you get the DLC, you can play cards as well. So exciting. But there are Chocobo Racers, so let's talk about them. You can catch the Chocobos in the wild, or find the special ones and then register them for races. Each Chocobo has certain traits that can activate at different points in the race, which ties into the ability to choose their racing strategy. Stay in the front, or keep themselves at the back, keep themselves in the middle, whatever. Throughout the race, the boost bar fills and then can be used with X. Finally, you can also use items to give your Chocobo boost for the race. And on the whole, it's fine. It's similar to the races in 7, possibly actually a bit more advanced, but I prefer the races in 7 because of one simple reason: manual mode. I realize that it's basically the same thing, but the fact that 7 has you actually riding the Chocobo and gives you a degree of control over it just makes it feel more involving. But overall, it's fun. Lastly, let's talk about the puzzles. There are occasions where you need to solve puzzles to resolve time distortions. These 3 puzzles being the needing to match colored crystals which alternate in their color, needing to collect all the crystals and completing a course while only being able to use each tile once, and lastly, needing to match clock hands by moving them the number of indicated spaces in both directions. And initially, I did enjoy these as little diversions, but later on, they go on for a bit too long. Especially the clock puzzles sometimes just ended up in me taking a random guess after 4 levels of this many hands to resolve. But my main issue with these side activities is that I don't feel like they were actually necessary. The exploration and side quests were more than enough to give a break from the main plot. It just feels like a bit of an overcorrection from the criticism the predecessor got. So, that now covers gameplay and means we can move on to characters. But that will require discussing more of the story, and so we may as well first discuss first and foremost, the graphics. I feel that it is worse than 13. Not drastically so, but there's definitely a noticeable drop between installments. It's not really an issue though, because firstly, I don't really care about graphics that much, and secondly, I do understand that with the short turnaround time for development, there will need to be a few corners cut. What I do have an issue with though, is that this is one of the worst performing Final Fantasies I have ever played. The opening cutscene was stuttertastic, the loading times are quite annoyingly long, and there were occasions where it would just hang for some inexplicable reason. It's not overtly terrible, and generally you could play the game no problem, but it is quite frustrating. I know that particularly the Square Enix PC ports are usually quite terrible, but on PlayStation, generally the main platform for these games initially, there is an expectation of stability. Again, 13, with better graphics, more CGI cutscenes, and bigger maps, was technically flawless. But again, it's not terrible or even really bad, more it's just not matching up to a standard I expect from a company known for being technically proficient. But let's move on from technical matters and on to artistic ones. The most notable is probably the insertion of the plague of this period in gaming, QuickTime events. In some of the in-game cutscenes, you are prompted to respond to actions taking place with a QuickTime event. And it's fine. I would probably hate it more if I was playing this in 2012, when every game had QTEs. But now, it's fine. On the positive note, I have always appreciated the original goal of QTEs, which was to make the player feel more involved with the cutscenes. Secondly, I do like the fact that you can get rewarded for doing the events. And lastly, I can always respect a game being constructed to move with the player failing the QTEs, rather than just getting a game over. On the negative side, I feel that it kind of fails the point of trying to be more cinematic. Firstly, the icons are just really big, which kind of overshadows what is happening on screen. Secondly, you have so much time to respond to them, you probably aren't going to fail. I get from an accessibility point of view that these are actually good, but it does kind of hamper the cinematic approach. Related to this is dialogue choices. There are occasional conversations where you are prompted to give a response, and if you give a completely correct response, you will get a reward. But it also doesn't make clear that you failed, so even if you don't get it right, it will still roll with it, which is just nice. It kind of makes it feel like you can give a genuine response rather than feeling like you're failing an event or something. Though sometimes you do have to repeat until choosing the correct option, but they still make it feel natural. However, there is one thing we do need to talk about with regards to presentation, and it's probably the thing that I am most disappointed about in the whole game. Yes, a Final Fantasy game disappointed me when it comes to the music. It's not that it's bad, it is still very good, but it just does not match up to the standards the franchise has set. Especially when the one unambiguously brilliant thing about 13 was the soundtrack. And while 13.2 does still have some absolute bangers, on the whole, the soundtrack just wasn't that memorable for me. Not helped by the fact that it quite often used tracks from 13. Now, I'm not going to necessarily complain about getting to hear Will to Fight and Vile Peaks again, but it is just a bit lacking in creativity. Again, I do understand the short turnaround time, but it is still disappointing. However, it is still a very good soundtrack. The actual bigger problem with it, in my opinion at least, is its implementation. Sometimes the music used in situations just doesn't match the situation. I think this is a pretty good example here. So what we've got happening here is a bunch of baby Flan busy misbehaving, running around causing all kind of mischievous havoc. Now, what kind of music would you use to accompany that? Did you think of this?
You know they don't mean to cause trouble. There's so many of them.
Ultimately though, it is still good, and just, again, disappointing because of established standards. But what it does have is undeniably the best version of Battle on the Big Bridge in the series. Yes, we aren't having a character discussion segment. This is for two intertwined reasons. Firstly, the characters are what can be best described as inoffensive. I don't find them to be extremely interesting, but I don't find them to be in any way grating. They also have decent arcs, which are mostly well fleshed out. Sarah must learn to become independent and not reliant on others, for example. And I do think Noel is actually pretty well characterized as being from a time when humanity has ended, through his general bluntness, displaying someone who's not very well versed in the social cues of those who would live in a society. But on the whole, they aren't overtly compelling. What they do, however, is form as vessels for examining the themes and examinations the plot and world are putting forward. 13.2 puts its core god front and center, and in doing so, much more clearly displays the behaviors and rationale, or lack thereof, of the deities in this world than was done by its predecessor. Basically, the events of the game are all knock-ons from the choice made by goddess Etro. She controls Valhalla, the world of the dead where souls go when they die. So this pretty much makes her the bee's knees, to the point of being worshipped and revered by the inhabitants of Pulse. She also shows an active interest in the humans and l'Cie that exist on the world below. And this forms the conflict at the heart of the Fabula Series. The gods, particularly Etro, are able to do whatever their whims desire, and there is no requirement for them to show any consideration for the possible impact of what they do. She is responsible for the core plot. Before I explain what that is, I would just like to quickly say that I appreciate how the plot was constructed. It's almost like a murder mystery, where you are left wondering who or what is responsible for the paradoxes, and there's quite a few twists along the way before you truly find out who the culprit is as well. Anyway, following the events at the end of 13, Etro finds the rebellious behavior carried out by the party to be of interest, and so she overrules the natural crystallization that would normally happen following the completion of their focus. This act contravenes the timeline as it was supposed to be, and so leads to the creation of the paradoxes, causing all the problems taking place throughout the game. So, we see a direct contravention based off of her own feelings, leading to negative consequences for those powerless to do anything in response. Let's look at some of the individuals affected by this.
Yes, I am one of many Yules. From your perspective, I am a Yule from the ancient past.
Appearing regularly aside our main villain, Yule appears within multiple timelines. We go on to discover that she is the Seeress. Etro granted her the power of reincarnation, and as a result, she is present throughout all of history. And in a cruel addition to this, she has also been granted the ability to see into the future, but with the caveat that each vision shortens her life. Going even further, she has also been forbidden from changing the future, despite the consequences of leaving it unaltered. The Yule who saw the destruction of the city of Padra and intervened to stop this fell directly after. So, her existence is to see the future, not do anything about it, and then die from seeing it. To be born again, see the future, do nothing about it, and die from seeing it. A pretty miserable existence, I'm sure we could agree. She does, however, share this misery with some others.
If you change the future, you change the past.
It keeps changing?
Change is the constant.
Our main villain, who does actually have a pretty understandable motivation. Caius and Noel are the guardians of Yule, tasked with the protection of the Series. Kind of ironic that you have heavy security for someone whose job literally kills them, but anyway, Caius' duties are slightly different to that of Noel. He is not just the guardian of her in the time period that he and Noel exist in, but all time periods. XIII gifted Caius with the Heart of Chaos, and so he has been granted immortality. As a result, he is the guardian of all Yules to ever exist, and so he has to witness the death of every single one before moving on to the next one. As a result, he comes to the decision to destroy the timeline, and so creates the distortions in order to see this goal through, forcing two others to be pulled in.
We have to face Caius on two fronts, in Valhalla and in the world of humans. If we don't...
In some kind of sick quid pro quo, the Farron sisters are roped in following their gift of being released from crystallization. With Caius now set on defeating XIII, she needed her own guardian. As a result, Lightning is made into her warrior, to engage in never-ending combat with Caius. Meanwhile, Sarah, who is literally just trying to live her life as best as she can while attempting to cope with a missing fiancé and sister. In this position, she is arbitrarily chosen to have the ability to see into the future. You know, that same ability that Yule has, which bombards her with a series of fates and atrocities that she isn't supposed to interfere with, and that drastically shortens her life with each vision. But Sarah has the additional caveat that she is supposed to be interfering with the future. She was given the ability to see what is coming and travel through time so that she can alter paradoxes and change the future, which if left untampered will end all life. But doing this will almost certainly kill her. So she has to make a decision of preserving herself or sacrificing herself for others. And ultimately she does make the decision for the greater good.
Caius, I know that every time I change things, I lose a part of my life. But don't you see? I don't care. I'm here to protect the future, and I will!
So, what is the recurring situation that we are seeing here? People are granted great powers and favors, but it has the trade-off of being tied into service which will severely constrain free will, dictate your life, or even lead to your death. A similar fate to which Machina and Rem experienced in Type 0. But this brings up a question. If these supernatural beings are so atrocious, why tolerate them? Well, 13-2's ending gives a pretty good clue as to why.
A manifestation of XIII. Should this heart stop beating, the goddess will die once again.
I killed the goddess?
When the goddess dies, the chaos of Valhalla is unleashed. The chaos has the power to warp the timeline and destroy the past.
Despite how horrible these otherworldly beings are, they are kind of necessary. A fair amount of the earlier plot gives a bit of insight into life without the fal'Cie that was so omnipresent before the collapse of Cocoon. So ubiquitous was their presence and impactful that all time after their demise has been referred to as a completely new era, after Fall. Probably not too surprising given the experiences that they had to go through. But what is more interesting is a bit of a U-turn that is taken in attitudes towards structures viewed negatively in the past. We see after time traveling for the first time and being attacked that Sarah is happy to see the military arrive. You know, that institution that clamped their boots down on everyone and conducted purges which resulted in accumulated thousands of deaths directly and even more by the expulsions that they did. Now, I get the feeling that the presence of a trained and disciplined security force can bring, but you would expect at least some suspicion given past events. Especially since for Sarah's experience, it's only been 3 years since the events of 13. And we see it even more when arriving at Academia. The first arrival sees the city being ravaged by an attack of Seath running riot throughout the city. We discover, soonish after, that in order to conduct some of the matters needed for the running of the new city, they constructed an artificial fal'Cie, which of course went haywire as we played System Shock for a bit. And this gives a pretty good insight into the reign that the fal'Cie had prior. Despite their tyrannical rule, they did actually do stuff. They provided a genuinely efficient and functioning society. Now, let me quickly explain something, since I feel like this is giving off the Mussolini made the trains run on time vibes. I will pretty much always accept a certain level of inefficiency if it is the trade-off needed for optimizing freedom and liberty. If an ideology or society ensures optimum efficiency and brilliance, but that requires a complete curtailment of rights and suppression of freedom, I would not want such a system. But I can't deny that many people do sacrifice freedom for conveniences quite often. And this is especially case in point in the world that 13 was set in. Cocoon is efficiently run with easily accessible shops and entertainment provided pretty regularly. The presence of clear security also does provide a feeling of comfort to those who are towing the line. It is this situation that creates a general happiness to be under the administration they are under, and a genuine fear of being expelled from it. This also goes to shed light on the fal'Cie's attitudes towards them. A feeling of, well, we provided you these things to make your life extremely comfortable and easier, so we're entitled to fit around with your lives if we feel like it. I should quickly make a brief aside and acknowledge that this was touched on in 13. When Lightning and Hope are sneaking into Bodom, Lightning has a realization of the role the fal'Cie play and the control that they have. And this honestly piqued my interest. It got me anticipating more, excited for a payoff of this idea. But then they didn't really mention it again? Anyway, so strong is the mark the fal'Cie have left. Immediately upon coming to an issue with the creation of a new society, the impulse is to bring back the fal'Cie, and not completely, but kind of revert things to the way they were before. And this importance of these beings is further reinforced by Etra. Her death at the end of the game results in pretty much everything going wrong, and the seeming impending death of the world. And this is a very interesting dynamic, the relationship between the people and the gods above them. It's very similar to the gods of Greek mythology. They were capricious, spiteful, hateful assholes, but the ancient Greeks knew they just had to put up with them
because, well, if they're not Jedi, things go wrong. Well, I guess Kratos didn't subscribe to that idea, but everyone else. However, there is an important distinction. The recurring situation present throughout my experience with Type 0, 13, and now 13-2. These situations can be challenged. In Type 0, Class 0 defy the offer of the sea and the appeal of Agito to break the cycle of war and slaughter the gods have created. In 13, the fal'Cie control is challenged, and now in 13-2, we see that they do go and find a different means of running their society without this proto-fal'Cie. And then they also find a means of handling the collapse of Cocoon's pillar. And as for the handling of the death of Etra, I suppose we'll have to see. That wasn't me being coy. I genuinely don't know what happens. I haven't played Lightning Returns. Following the dissolution of the Clash, Joe Strummer embarked on a series of different projects. He filled in as lead singer for the Pogues, worked on movie soundtracks, before getting around to forming his own band again, Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros. The band's first 2 albums were not very well received, mostly being pretty average on the whole. However, the 3rd album, released the year after his death, was well received and served as a great send-off. Throughout this time, Cut the Crap was still completely ignored, not being put on any of the Clash's compilations or collections that would be released. However, there was one caveat: the track This Is England. It would go on to be included on The Essential Clash, a song that features insightful lyrics and is actually quite pleasing to listen to. And it highlights something that was missing with the album it featured on. While undeniably the music aspect was a failure, the same can't necessarily be said for the lyrical work. Cut the Crap features some good and insightful lyrics and analysis within them, ignoring the spiteful lyrics of We Are the Clash. 3 Card Trick speaks of the class war and the rut of those stuck underneath the establishment. North and South contrast the discrepancy between the 2 regions, and of course, This Is England laments the feeling of hopelessness and futility of the average person living within 80s England. All of this ignored due to the negative experience the music created. And I can't help but compare this to 13. It is now well documented my general negativity towards it. But that's not because of what it was trying to say or analyze. It hinted at interesting ideas, but did not look at them in an interesting enough way. It did not provide an experience which encouraged you to get involved with it. But they were there. And now, having played 13-2, with it providing a far more enjoyable and engaging experience, I can actually understand what it is behind this Fabula Crystallis series. 13-2 does have quite a few problems as well. As I've said, the characters aren't that interesting, and it has quite a few plot contrivances. It specifically relies a lot on its alternate timelines to write itself out of some of the holes it creates for itself. But as I said, it reveals the lore and the themes in such a more interesting way that I can actually look back at 13 now and appreciate the moments and what it was trying to say. It really is a case of presentation matters. You can have some of the greatest ideas and things to say, but if you can't present them, you are going to fall flat. I can very much appreciate this. It may seem like I just ignore the comments I have received, but I have been trying to slow my speech and enunciate more clearly. And I've now actually started to include custom captions from this video, which will be going forward. I appreciate the comments pointing it out. Well, apart from some really self-righteous prats. And honestly, I am trying to improve my diction. So, we leave 13.2 on a positive note. Well, my opinion of it at least. We can't really say the same for the game's actual ending. We'll have to see how Lightning Returns goes, as we wind down the 13 series. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to see how that one goes. But also keep in mind that there are still some other Fabula friends to talk about as well.